Welcome to the Francisca Show podcast on JewishCoffeehouse.com, the show where I give a voice to Jewish issues, topics, and people. I'm Francisca, your host. Hey, Fran Stans, thanks so much for tuning back in. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Thank you for listening to the series with CP, Randy, and Emilio. Thank you so much for all your feedback. If you have something to comment on my Unorthodox life, I may do something as a follow-up. I know it just dropped on Friday. I do have one more announcement regarding my services. I'm no longer offering the VIP launch days. Now I have a DIY online course that's available to anyone and everyone who is looking to launch a podcast on their own. It is available for a very reasonable price. You will have all the information and guidance you need to be launched successfully. Without any further ado, I'm so excited to present this episode to you. Thanks for listening to The Francisca Show, a part of Jewish Coffee House Network. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to The Francisca Show, Franstans. Today with us, we have Dr. Emmanuel Bloch on the show with us. Welcome.
Hi.
And we're here to talk about nothing other than the topic of Tsniut or Tznius once again, and with a man. So I am so excited about this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for welcoming me.
We will be going into this from an academic, intellectual, and legal standpoint. So don't get scared here. We don't have a rabbi telling us how to dress. We have an outsider, shall we say. By outsider, I mean a man, even though Tznius doesn't just apply to women. However, culturally, it became a woman's thing. And I'll have you comment on all of that. I'm just so excited for this conversation. So let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional and Jewish background.
I'll start with a professional background. I was first trained as a lawyer. I worked as an attorney at law in Europe, mostly in Switzerland, in Geneva. And at some point, I decided after 3 years, I was unhappy with my job. I decided to leave and start a second career in Jewish studies. So I did a PhD in Jewish philosophy and still very interested in legal stuff. So I studied halacha, how halacha develops, how it changes. And Tzniut is very interesting from that perspective. And maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that. From a Jewish point of view, my family is from Alsace-Lorraine, from a small city in east of France, and not very observant with some traditions. I became much, much more religious when I was 18, 19. As a young adult, I ended up in yeshiva in Monsey, New York, of all places. At also I studied for almost 2 years, and then continued half-time in Kollel. So for 10 years, mostly in Haredi communities, and then later on, this is all connected together, but I kind of discovered what an academic perspective shows on Judaism and all questions that are controversial. And I kind of moved on to a more modern kind of orthodoxy. So I guess I'm modern Orthodox now, but it's hard to put me, and I happen to find myself in a box. So I'm still very, very interested to keep halacha, to keep all the mitzvot in learning Torah. I have friends in all kinds of communities.
Okay, so very diverse. Sounds a lot like myself. We also had our lives cross many years back. Can you tell us a little bit about that? You probably have more of a memory than I do.
All right. Yeah, it was 20 or 25 years ago when I had just passed the bar exam and I could not sit in front of my study table for another minute. I decided to take a trip to Moscow to see Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg. And I had a friend who was supposed to come with me, and he canceled on me at the last minute. So I ended up visiting Moscow by myself. And I spent one Shabbat meal with your family. I remember kids in the background. I don't remember more than that. I remember your parents were extremely welcoming. And I had a fantastic discussion with them. I had a fantastic time in Moscow. Pretty sure you were there. But yes, so it's the second time we meet.
And I want to just acknowledge how, the world goes around and somehow things rekindle again. And I want to thank Chaim Seiman for introducing us this time around. Okay. I know you say you're fascinated by halacha and the Jewish law, but how do you land specifically on Tsniut? Like, what was so fascinating about Tznius as opposed to any other Jewish law?
Yeah. So yes, I am indeed interested in halacha, how it changes in response to internal factors, in response to external challenges. Tsniut, I'm going to use the modern pronunciation, is unique in a way. And that's one of the central ideas of my research. Tsniut was not the halachic topic for many centuries. Like for most of Jewish history, Tsniut was not a legal halachic discussion. It became a legal halachic topic in the 1960s. That's the main idea from which all of my research proceeds. By that, I don't mean to say that Tsniut is a modern invention. That for sure is wrong. We know from paintings, we have drawings with certain diaries from Sarah Schneer, for instance, from the 1920s, the 1930s in Poland. We know that Tsniut, we have ethical writings in Musar. Tsniut used to exist for as long as Judaism has been Judaism. But for a long, long time, Tsniut was like a mimetic tradition. It was passed from mother to daughter, from neighbors and friends at home, in the streets. It was never codified. It was never couched in legal language. It was never acquired textually. It was something that you, just as you know how to dress today, if you go to the office and you know it's not the same way you dress if you want to go on a hike or if you want to go to a swimming pool, men and women knew how to dress in 16th century Poland or in 18th century Algeria. The dress code was very obvious. What happened in the 1960s is that we see the flourishing of a new genre in halachic literature, new books, halachic books, written in halachic language, in the traditional halachic style, describing how women are supposed to dress, what areas of the body you have to cover, how you're supposed to cover, what colors are permitted, what colors are forbidden, if there's any difference if you're home or in the street. And all these questions are dealt intensively by many rabbis, not just one, mostly male. There's like two women writing on that, but mostly it's men writing for women, which is an interesting discussion by itself. And this is really a novel phenomenon. So the claim is that Tsniut was not legal and became legal. And that switch of the 1960s is something I'm interested to research because it shows the change, that you can touch it, you can see how halacha changes in response to different phenomena that we can discuss now.
Okay, so how does the halacha change? Tell us what you found in your research.
Once you realize that Tsniut has changed from a mimetic, implicit tradition to a text-based, rule-based discourse, then you can ask a couple of questions. One of the questions you can ask, that's the one that I'm mostly fascinated by, is how do we justify, how do we create new norms? How does that happen? What are the conditions by which rabbis can, write halacha? How do you, and reading all these books, there's like a lot of books. In the English-speaking world, the famous author is Rabbi Pesach Eliyahu from famous posek from Gateshead, who passed away 2 years ago. But really, I have like 41 or 42 books written in English and French and Yiddish and every language that the Jews speak today. So it's a pan-Orthodox phenomenon that in every segment of the Jewish world, like in Sfaradim and Yemenite, it is someone somewhere who's writing halachot, hilchot, tznius. It's a huge change. How do you justify the new norms? Well, the rabbis, I guess, had a dilemma. Like this traditional lifestyle, these traditional norms that from women are supposed to dress in a certain way, all of a sudden, they were interested to express the same idea in halachic language. And to write norms, you need to go back traditionally. You need to go back to the Talmud. You need to go back to the Gemara. You need to go back to the commentators. So you need to write in a certain way to say, this is what the Talmud says in Brachot, in Ketubot, in somewhere. And then this is how the Rishonim, the medieval commentators, have dealt with this issue. And then you go through the whole halachic literature until today. And then you say, and this is asur or mutar, this is permissible or forbidden. And when you look at that, you see that there are a couple of strategies that the rabbis have used. One of them, probably the most common one, is to use the concept of erva. Erva is a word that means nakedness, and it's used in the Talmuds, famously in Brachot 24a. The Talmud says that, Kol be'isha erva, that the voice of a woman is nakedness. I'm sure that some of your auditors will have a lot to say about that. All these sayings are famous and controversial. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to understand how this has changed and how this has developed.
I'm a singer also, right?
Yeah. It's always incredible how things discussed 1800 years ago have become so important today for today Yiddishkeit. The hair of a woman is nakedness. It doesn't talk about a married woman. She pays attention. The skin of a woman. If you look carefully in the Talmud and in the 18th centuries of halachic creativity, the rabbis have always spoken on an issur, a prohibition, for men to daven and to say Kriyat Shema. The prohibition is always on the male. If you're a male, you need to say Kriyat Shema and you're exposed to a certain sight that's deemed to be immodest, then you can't say Shema because you're stimulated. It's erotically stimulating to be in the presence of an unclad or relatively unclad female. There's in no source prior to the 1960s is you see an obligation for women to cover themselves. That is the chidush. That's the novelty of the 1960s when the rabbis had to find texts, old texts, and reinterpret them. One of them is this sugya, this passage in Brachot. They changed a prohibition for males to daven into an obligation for women to cover their bodies. That's one of the strategies that actually works very, very well. Some of the other strategies used are much less intuitive. But even so, I think I can show in my research that this switch from erva, from a prohibition for males to obligation for women, comes with far-reaching consequences. It's not just that you change something, then halacha has its own logic, and then the logic is taken further and further, and the obligation for women becomes like this independent category that extends much wider than first expected and first meant by the rabbis who did the switch. So to go back, how did the rabbis do that? Well, in one way, the rabbis did what they've always done. They went back to the old sources, to the Talmud, and found the closest sources that they could find, and then they reinterpreted. And there's a phenomenon of massive reinterpretation of traditional sources to justify norms regulating how women are supposed to dress.
I just feel like I'm getting emotional. I just want to acknowledge that. Hold on, let me just take a deep breath. So I have two things to say. Number one, I can hear on one side all the more right-wing or conservative, whatever you want to call them, people say halacha was always something that was just taught or given over from parent to child. And, there was a time when we went and we wrote it all down, and then we had the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah, everything else that became written law, but it was always unwritten and unspoken, but it was observed at all times. So that's the argument that I'm assuming is going to come from the right. On the left, and let's call it the far left, call it the ex-Orthodox, they will say, see, rabbis go and make up all this stuff, and you call it Judaism, you call it Torah. Well, they just made it up in the 1960s. It's a new genre of Judaism. How can you believe in God? So I'm just voicing some of the concerns that will or have been coming up for our audience members. So let's go through that.
Right. These are two really good questions, and it's not easy to answer both of them at the same time. And sometimes get one, and sometimes get the other. I'm not used to get the two questions from the right and the left in one sentence. It's going to be challenging.
We could split it up.
Let me just say that I, in a way, identify with the two criticisms. In my place in life, in my, position, I look back on my years in the Haredi world, and I look at people I see as brothers and sisters, not as often the academic world world sees as the other or like a threat and anachronisms, these are my threats.
The study sample.
Yeah, no,
Object
right.
of your
Not
research.
an object of research. For me, some of my best friends are still in that world. I'm in touch with them day in and day out. I understand the challenge. In a way, if it's too challenging, I would be happy. And if I write a book, I think I should write somewhere that perhaps some people should not read that. If it's too much of a challenge to your hashkafa, just don't read me. Because I don't want to create, a crisis of faith. At the same time, if you really understand what I'm trying to say, I think it's less of a challenge that you might believe. I don't claim that rabbis create things yesh me'ayin, out of nothing, out of thin air, or that they reform Judaism of nothing. What I do believe is that rabbis, especially in the 19th and the 20th century, want to preserve Yiddishkeit against changes. And they take all the steps they can to make sure that halacha, Torah, whatever you want to call it, Yiddishkeit continues and is preserved, and that the integrity of a Jewish tradition is maintained. Tzniut, in a way, like the halachization of Tzniut, is a conservative movement to preserve it against changes that we have not yet discussed. In the 1960s, the West was going crazy, like the sexual revolution. The way to translate a tradition into halacha is a way to preserve something that was always part of tradition. The next claim to say that, my claim to say that, at the moment you translate Tzniut into halacha, you also change it. Yes, I guess it's a challenge to a traditional worldview, but maybe less than you think. I believe this has been going on always, like, in a way, orthodoxy. I mean, that is the thesis of historian Jacob Katz. Orthodoxy is a reaction. He used to call that orthodoxia ketguva. It's a reaction to modernity. Like, Katz would say, well, if you look at Eastern Europe in the 15th century, what did you see? You see the Jews keeping Shabbat, Hilchot Nida, and all that, eating kosher. If you look today in Bnei Brak, you see Jews keeping Shabbos and kosher and all of that. What's the difference? The difference is between a traditional community in the Middle Ages that kept things intuitively, like didn't think about that. It was just a way of life. And today, when to stay firm, you need strategies. You need to make sure you preserve your lifestyle. The decision to remain observant in the face of many other options, that is a huge change that comes with ripple effects. And then you create political parties in Israel, you create journals, and all kinds of norms that are meant to preserve the boundaries of a community. So Tsni'ut, in a way, is a very traditional move. It's a way to preserve something that was always part of tradition, but the decision to preserve it, in a way, changes it. I can show that in many ways. We need to give examples.
Please do.
Right. So one example relates to the colors. As far as we can see, a traditional implicit Tzniut knew of one color where there's forbidden for clothing. It was red. Red, we know that Jewish women never wore any red colors. We don't see anything beyond reds. At the moment when in the 1960s, some rabbis decide to translate Tzniut into halacha, they have to give explanations. They have to say why. Why is red forbidden? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? That's a huge change between traditional Tzniut to modern halachic Tzniut, as we need to give explanation, a whole paradigm of explanation to justify the new norms. And, well, there's more than one explanation, but famously, Rabbi Falk and all the people in his approach say, well, red is forbidden because it's sexual, it's attractive for men. Red is seductive. And that's why Jewish women should not be too attractive, so no red. But at that moment, when you say red is not good, because it's just too enticing. But, well, you open a whole host of other questions, in particular, maybe different colors as well. And then you need to take the logic of what colors are too sexual for Jewish women to wear to its logical conclusions. And you find books, mostly in the Haredi, Anglo-Haredi world, that discuss whether yellow or pink or blue, gold, where this color, where there's a whole ilchot tzvaim, the laws of colors, which one is forbidden, which was that it never existed before. It was unthinkable in the 18th century because red was just, this social norm that everybody knew about, but no one integrated in a wider theoretical halachic framework. As soon as you translate that into halakha and you say, well,
once you give an explanation, then it translates into everything else because you have to use that logic for every other color as well, every other behavior or dress.
Right. And then you have new norms. So part of this obsessiveness with Tsniut is that the moment of translation generates new norms automatically. That's what I mean to say when you say a move meant to preserve halacha created something that is in many ways the same, and is in many ways not exactly the same. There's like a trajectory in this social change. Now, just as a point of comparison, another rabbi, an Israeli rabbi called Eliezer Melamed, who's religious Zionist, if wrong, hard to also put in a box. He said, well, red is forbidden, but no, it's not because red is sexual. Red is forbidden because it's a color of violence. It's just a sign for danger. You go in the street, the stop sign is red, and you can go when it's green. So red is the color of danger and color of violence. That's not good for women. Believe what this explanation or don't believe, I'm not interested. But if you give an explanation with a whole shtick of yellow, green, all that doesn't start. Because yellow and green and blue and all of that, it does not represent danger. So Rabbi Melamed says it's only red and no other color that is an issue from Tzniut's perspective. So depending on what kind of explanation you provide, you get different halachot in the end.
Are you saying in the 1960s this became an obsession on women specifically, whereas people love to bring in Atznei Elecha Ima Hashem Elokecha, right? It applies to both women and men. This is not gender biased halacha. Okay, talk to me about that.
Atznei Elecha was never quoted. Before the 1960s, no one used it. All right, you have two psukim in Tanakh that use the shoresh, the root tzadi nun ein. Atznei Elecha in Elokecha, that's what we just quoted, and Vetztum Chochma in Mishli, in the book of Proverbs, I think. The truth is that Tsniut, if we go back, the concept of Tsniut appears in the Talmud and the Midrash first, and it's not always women. It's meant originally for men and women. It's you have in Tsniut how to behave, like describe how to behave when you go to the restroom, for instance, or when you have sex with your spouse. That's Tsniut had different meanings in different sources. It was also used in the context of women, and that meaning became much more predominant with the centuries passing until in the 20th century, when you say Tzniut, you understand it means how women have to behave, mostly. What changed? Again, Tzniut used to be an ideal. It used to be like a musar. It was never halacha. We have values in the Jewish tradition that are not halachic, like you have to be generous, you have to give money, you have to be patient, you're not supposed to get upset. No one has written a halachic book saying these are the 5 conditions that have to be met for you to get upset. No one does that. You're supposed not to get upset. Do your best. Tzniut was some kind of that. Yes, women were supposed to be modest, but no one described exactly how women are supposed to dress. In the 1960s, well, it's not exactly precise, but the huge change took place in the 1960s. Again, most likely as a result of a huge change in the West. That we call it a sexual revolution, like all the traditional codes of sexual behavior, of dress behavior were challenged. This is the time when the miniskirt was invented, women were wearing pants, which was like shocking for people back then. There were discussions about different sexual orientation. And that change crept in from neighborhoods, from communities, and the need was felt to, preserve a traditional lifestyle. On the left, people on the left in academic will say the need was felt to regulate the bodies of women and to exercise certain power. It's like the power of the rabbis to regulate the bodies of women. There's a gender perspective that's very much at play here. But so there's this reaction against huge changes in the West that were perceived to be threatening. And that's when you see the first books on Tzniut. And there's several starting points to that. You have there's a Hasidic book written by a book written by a Hasidic rabbi, like an Admor of Nadvorna, which is a small Hasidut that I personally didn't know before. Rabbi Rosenbaum was an Admor of Nadvorna Zutschke, a very small group of Hasidim, who wrote a book in the 1960s in Israel. Rabbi Shlomo Aviner, who's a right-wing religious Zionist, like the rabbi for settler movement, also wrote a book. It starts in different places at the same time, and it soon becomes prevalent in the entire Orthodox world, modern, not modern, everywhere. So a huge part of that is a reaction to changes in the West. That is not the entire story, but it's a huge part of the story. A different part of the story people usually don't see is that halacha, well, there's a phenomenon of halachization, of legalization, of ideas and concepts that used to be Jewish but not legal became more legal. Is a good example of that. We all learned, I suppose, like that the Chafetz Chaim had described the laws of Lashon Hara. The truth is that, slandering was always musar. There's very little halachot of Lashon Hara in the Rambam, very little in the Shulchan Aruch. It was always meant to be a value. Do your best. Don't speak bad.
Right. You're saying values became official laws.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit. I really appreciate your academic and intellectual / legal perspective, but I like to go personal, if you allow. You've mentioned you grew up in a more traditional / observant home. You have experienced Haredi, Monsey, Yeshiva. You have chosen a more modern life for yourself as an adult. Tell us a little bit about that personal journey, and how do you personally react? As you said, this is not just your object of research. This is personal, maybe not as personal if you'd be a woman, but tell us what realizations, or how does this sit with you personally?
You mean general, like the religious approach to life, or in terms of Tsni'ut specifically?
Well, both.
All right. Again, I think there
Learning and studying this, how does this affect you religiously?
I got to this because I was interested in researching halacha. I understand that for women, it's a very personal, it's a very charged and emotional issue. I talk to my wife and I see how she reacts.
How does she react?
It's a very emotional. She has, I say her with her permission, she has a slight sleep disorder. That means it's sometimes a bit hard for her to wake up. She sleeps very deeply. And we have experience. I can, in the morning I can show her one of his books and say, what do you think of his passage? And the feeling of outrage that the rabbi tell that about how women should dress. It really is an emotional topic. It works much better than coffee to wake up in the morning. I think I would love a world in which Tsni'ut would be still a value. Would still tell you and would tell men and women at the same time that it's a value to be implemented by both sexes. So it's very important in the Jewish tradition to be modest. We have to respect our bodies. We have to respect our own sexuality. But that, if that would be left to each person to be implemented in his or her own life, just like we do for Kibbutz Tzedakah, the halachization, the transformation of Tzniut into halacha is, well, I understand why it was done, but at the same time, it's a way to standardize and to turn Tsniut into some kind of uniform for people, whereas I don't think it was bad for many centuries. It is part of me that regrets with change. I think we would be better off by just keeping it as an ideal, not discard, not rejecting it, but keeping it as an ideal.
A value.
To be pursued according to, each one of us has limitations and certain circumstances of life that makes it can express in different ways. Right.
And why did you become more modern than your yeshiva experience?
I always liked to read more when it was good for my own sake, or to read books that are not on the canon. So that's, I guess, how I became religious in the first place, and that's how I became religious in a different way 10 years later. I like to read, I like to discover new ideas, I like to talk to people from different communities. When I was 18 years old, I used to challenge my parents that we would keep certain halachot, they keep certain mitzvot, but we never went all the way. Like, we would go to shul on Shabbat, but we did not keep Shabbat. And I used to ask them what we believe. If we believe in that stuff, well, we keep it. If we don't believe it, well, maybe you can just watch TV on Shabbat. And what's the point of going to shul and read all these strange Hebrew texts? But it took me years, but it took me to yeshiva, and I was very happy. I discovered communities that I think are just very admirable. When I started reading academic books on Judaism, my whole perspective changed 10 years later. Halacha and Torah are perceived in the frum world as above history and above time. I think that was your question. Torah does not change. Halacha does not change. Well, it's quite easy to show that it does change. You just need to plot over time. Take any institution, being, Tzniut or anything, and you see what the rabbis have written in the 2nd century, in the 10th century, in the 15th century. A lot of stuff is going to stay the same, but there's also going to be a lot of changes. And once you've seen that, it's hard to believe in this version of Yiddishkeit that is this treasure, this heritage that is passed on from generation to generation with as little changes as possible. I don't think it's a real representation of what has happened over the centuries. And when I changed that piece, I felt it was hard for me to stay in the Haredi world. Again, I'm still very much in touch with many friends. I don't think I can be an insider once I disagree on such a basic point of hashkafa. It's been a quest for truth. And my life has been a quest for truth, and I realize that I say that, and some of your auditors will disagree with me, but still feel very much this way in my life.
Well, it's okay to disagree, and I think the same curiosity and commitment that led you to a more observant Jewish lifestyle also guided you to your most authentic Jewish observance. And if anyone's listening and is questioning my language here, it's because I think the most authentic Jewish lifestyle is for it to become individualized. And what a lot of our communities are doing is mainstreaming and factorizing. I'm making up these words right now, but they're turning Jewish lifestyle into a factory. And this is how you have to be Jewish, which is, as you're mentioning, not at all how it used to be. Right. It was a value-based life, an ideals-based life. And now it's just very commercial. And it's very anti-individualistic Judaism, and I'm sure people will be yelling and throwing tomatoes, as we call it on the group, because I'm sure there are lots of Haredi or other types of very strict communities that think they do promote individualistic Jewish hashkafa. Work on your relationship with Hashem and get closer with Hashem. Everything is about your personal and individualized work on yourself and your performance and observance.
I strongly believe that there's many ways to be a good Jew. My way is not the only one way, and I think each path you take comes with a certain price you have to pay. And if you choose to be modern Orthodox, or if you choose to be this way or this, you have a price that you need to pay. And very often the criticism that is heard from the right, that it's, you're taking a risk. It's a valid criticism, but there's also a risk to become too much to the right. And that price is not always discussed or not publicly discussed. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches and to all the ways one can be Jewish. As long as you make a decision consciously and, realizing the chances you take and the advantages you're going to get, I think there's a lot of ways to be a good Jew. My own way, my own path, for what it's worth. There's this famous Mishnah in Baba Metzia, the first Mishnah that describes two men coming to the Beis Din holding a talit. And each one said, I found it. Ani mitzatia. This is my talit. I found it in the street. And each one is pulling the talit. And then the Beis Din has to decide what to do. Well, I think that I'm the talit. And I two huge heritages, two huge philosophy, two worlds that claim my allegiance, that the traditional world of Torah, mitzvot, and learning Torah and all of that, that's pulling me in one direction. And modernity and science and the arts, and there's a lot of things that you can put on the other way. And my task in life, my path in Judaism is try to stay intact. I feel it's a tension, but find a lot of creativity in Vantage, in trying to be authentic, not in just one level, in one sphere, just tradition, but trying to be able to embrace the good sides of modernity. Science and democracy and arts. And there's a lot of good things in that in the modern world. And be whole and be authentic and be ne'eman, to be as authentic as you can in the two realms of my life.
You mentioned risk. There are risks on both ends. Well, the risk being too orthodox is extremism, and that turning people off or just becoming extreme.
Oh, no,
and then
much more than that.
What else is there?
The rejection of science. I mean, people refusing to get vaccinated, or like the time it took for the right-wing communities to accept that COVID is dangerous. It's a tragic. We paid with thousands of people dying just because there's less connection to science in these communities. I also think there's a lot of superstition, to be honest, a lot of things that you don't see in more modern communities. And since we don't shy away from controversy, I've seen a lot of financial crimes in ways it's expensive to be a good Jew. It's expensive to finance a chassan when a child gets married. And I've seen a lot of schemes to get money when you're not completely honest. I feel a lot of, I'm sure that you can get going to be a lot of good reactions when you sit between friends and discuss that. It's a well-known reality.
Okay, and what are the risks of modern orthodoxy or the modern life?
Well, for sure, there's a risk of assimilation, risk of losing passion. I have not found the same passion for mitzvah, the same passion for learning. Yeah, go to Friday night in the typical modern Orthodox, you just fall asleep. And it's not. It's drama. It's cosmic drama. You're talking to God. You're talking to Hashem. I just don't find. Also, on the very left end, at the moment when if your Torah is just a way for you to justify what the world is thinking in 2022, so all your Torah is trying to justify the current ideology, then you've lost everything. You need to maintain a dialogue between tradition and modernity, and in some parts of the modern orthodoxy, we find ways, to justify things that just in vogue today and will be passé in 10 years from now. And it's just a game of trying to find one verse, one pasuk, or one piece of a Talmud to say, well, Torah is just about what we think today. And then it turns Torah into a game. That it's a farce. And once you've done that, then you lost everything. You lost, and probably losing the next generation who sees through that game and sees there's no authenticity, no passion, no sincerity. So the challenge for modern Orthodoxy is to be open to this other world and still maintain that level of commitment. It's not an easy way to go.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to bring up before we wrap up?
We have not discussed another part of my research, which is to study how different Jewish communities, the hashkafa, fruits, you can see how the place of men and women, the body and the neshama, different concepts, how they are understood. And you find, reading all of these books, different visions of how men and women are supposed to behave. And you have huge differences inside the Haredi world and huge differences inside the Dati, Leumi, modern Orthodox world. So what I'm also trying to do is to use these books on Tzniut as a way to get into the brain, into the mind of the hashkafa of different from communities, different segments of the Orthodox world. Tzniut is a way can be understood as an ink blot test, like a test. And I find that very fascinating to see that in a way we have discussions in the Frum community. We not always aware, but what's the place of men and women? What's their job? What are their functions? What is the place of Jews in Israel? All these are huge questions that we need to address in today's world. And there's a lot of thinking, a lot of discussion going on. There's one way to reach that part of Jewish creativity and Orthodox creativity in the 21st century. All right, let's see. Rabbi Falk, if you ask him.
I feel like saying Rabbi Falk is already triggering to people, but okay, keep going.
I don't know how to do that. Please tell me. How can you do that without triggering strong...
I'm just aware. It's just crazy.
All right.
And then I could just see at the same time other people saying, wow, Kedusha. While you're thinking how to respond, I'm personally not, I'm okay. You don't have to worry about my mental health right now on this episode. This reminds me of the Just Say No campaign in 1980 with Nancy Reagan. It feels like legalizing Tzniut was this great marketing shtick to make women more tznius, and it failed. By failed, I mean you have either women who feel they are being bossed over, controlled by the men. When historically, obviously, we were controlled by the men. I don't think it had to be legalized. Look at the ketubah. But just saying no or legalizing and saying, the inches, which is Rabbi Falk's book, it's all about the inches. That's a big failure. It takes away from the value. Let me give you an example. You could have a woman wearing very flowy pants or a big sweater. It doesn't cover the knees, but everything that needs to be covered, she almost looks like she has a tent on. Right. So I can just see someone, and I've seen this. Oh, she looks so tznius. Obviously, you would never put that on because the knees aren't covered. But they're in the spirit of tznius. Right. You don't see any curves. They just look appropriate, right? Yeah. So this campaign just feels like a failure. Okay, I'm waiting for the tomato.
You can say the same about Shadles, obviously, but some of his wigs are just so beautiful, just much more than it's a criticism that's often. I'm personally, maybe that's my answer. I'm not interested in telling anyone how to dress. I'm a scientist, a social scientist. I'm not someone who's interested in telling anyone what to do.
No, I get that. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, his idea, well, he's not the most extreme, by the way. Rabbi Rosenbaum is even much more extreme. Basically, you have 5 visions of what Tzniut is. One is centered on the male. One is centered on the female. One is centered on the nation. One on the family. And one on the community. And I'll explain. The vision centered on the male, this is this Rabbi Rosenbaum, this Adamur of Nanvoda. This is like an old world that says, well, Tzniut is meant to protect men. So Tzniut is meant to make sure that males are not, sexually aroused. I'm sure we're all familiar with that approach. Rabbi Falk says, He says, Tzniut expresses a woman's identity, expresses her inequalities. I understand that some people will find that not palatable and disputable and all of that, but it's still interesting that he puts a woman at the center. He described Tzniut as the equivalent of Talmud Torah. No, that's very new. And you will not find that anywhere in the last 18 centuries. Men have this mitzvah par excellence. It is Talmud Torah. You can always learn more. You can always study more. You're supposed to not waste 5 minutes because you're supposed to study Torah. Don't be told that. Women have, according to Rabbi Falk, women have this infinite mitzvah. You can always do more. You're always supposed to do more. Even inside your home, you're supposed to be tznius. And he goes very far in comparing Talmud Torah to Tzniut. Now, Tzniut, which was not one of the 613 mitzvot at all, it's not listed anywhere, has become the number of this foundation of Yiddishkeit in the Anglo-Haredi world, starting in Gateshead in North America. And Rabbi Falk will tell you that women have like this direct thought connection to God, which is also very new, a new idea. If you read in the Talmud, the Talmud asks, what kind of merits do women have? And the Talmud says, women, bring kids to school and give men time to study Torah. Women is understood to be helpers. In Rabbi Falk's book, as strange as it can be, Tzniut has become this direct connection to the divine. That's number 2. Rabbi Rosenbaum speaks about the male. Rabbi Falk speaks about the woman. Rabbi Aviner, a French-born Israeli rabbi, says that Tzniut is necessary for the Jewish people to live in Eretz Israel. It's just the nation of Israel needs Tzniut. It's, Talmid of Rav Kook, Tzvi Yehuda Kook, and he thinks that there's like messianic dimension to Tzniut. That's how we make sure that the Jewish people comes back to its ancestral homeland. And then Rabbi Melamed thinks that Tsniut is a way to make sure that husband and wife love each other, like, the way Nida is understood today. That's a way to make sure that there's marital bliss in the family. We make sure that you preserve a certain sexuality that has to stay within the family, within the couple. And Rabbi David Stav, he's the rabbi of Shoham in Israel, and he used to be a candidate to the post of chief rabbi of Israel. He's on the left wing of the Dati Leumi world. He says that Tzniut is a way to make sure that people don't become objects, don't become objectified. That there's a tendency to view the other in front as an object. That's a risk that men and women can fall prey to, that we can all view people in front of us as object and not as subject. And Tzniut is a way to make sure that we live in a world when we meet other people as subject, as real people. So this is a very academic, inspired by, the rabbis who went to university and have PhDs. So very, very different perception of what Tzniut is all about. 5 main archetypes that I found, and they range the whole spectrum from the most right-wing communities to the most left-wing communities, and you find very, very different conversation of what the goals and objectives of Tzniut and how they are supposed to be accomplished.
So are you saying everyone can find an option or a category that speaks to them so they can fulfill that mitzvah?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to say that different communities have conversations of what it means to be a man and a woman, of what it means to have a body and have a neshama, and how to find a balance. And the answers are not the same if you're in Israel or in North America, or if you're Modern Orthodox. We don't give exactly the same answers, but these questions are asked constantly and discussed constantly, and Tzniut is one place where all these huge questions are being discussed.
I think we covered a lot in this conversation. Is there any parting words you'd like to share? Did you have any crisis of faith in your work with this research?
I think this might surprise you. I think the one question I still have is, in many ways, I think the halachization of Tzniut is understandable. I think it's objectionable. I think it transforms Tzniut into something that is obsessive and extreme. And each time something bad happens, COVID happens, it's because women are not Tzniut enough. This is not healthy. But that I knew before. I knew that before. I guess the one thing that I realized is that the right-wing communities have done something to preserve Tzniut. On the left, I'm not sure we have. I'm not sure the more modern Orthodox communities have felt the threat of modernity to the value of Tzniut and have done anything to preserve it. So in a way, the one question that many questions I'm still grappling with, but this one question is, maybe modern Orthodox people should do more to preserve Tzniut, and maybe we can find ways to create a healthier Tzniut for everybody, for men and women, for our daughters and our sons, for all of us, for all our communities. And ignoring the question is a choice as well, and it also comes with a price. So I may not always like the answers on the right, this rigidity, the codification. I may see the problems in that, but the option not to do anything about Tzniut is also a path that comes with a price. I guess that's one of crisis. I don't know, but it's one of the questions that I'm asking myself.
Do you have daughters?
I do, 2. 4 kids, 2 girls and two boys.
I guess that's one of the questions you're working on. How do I pass this on to my daughters, being modern Orthodox?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think Tzniut is a question of centimeters, and I don't think it's a question of colors, but I do think that boys and girls should be aware that it's part of Jewish tradition. Sure.
I do want to ask you, though, the way you do your research and you studied this, I'm assuming you spent years doing this. Did you have a university supporting you through this? Did you do tenure? Or is this a passion project?
No, it was my dissertation. I'm turning this into a book now. So hopefully when the book is out, everybody can, burn it for different reasons, but we can have massive autodafis of my book from the right and on the left and on the right for different reasons. Yeah, I was privileged to have 2 advisors, one in Israel and one here in the United States. Professor Benjamin Brown is probably the leading scholar in terms of research on orthodoxy. And Professor Susan Stone, it was very important to me to have a woman advisor as well for such a topic. She is a legal scholar in the United States at Yeshiva University, Cardozo Law School. And both of them were just fantastic. It was very, very, very fortunate to study with them.
And do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel like you have answers? Do you feel like there's a satisfying end to your research, or
Nirvana, it's bliss? I don't know. I think I have a fantastic topic. I'm still trying to find a way to talk to different people. It's much easier to talk about Mishnah or the Zohar and anything that has been stable for the last 500 years. There's less angst about the topic. I'm talking about things that people have strong feelings about, and I want to present new perspectives than people. I mean, typically when we have guests on a Shabbos meal, for lunch, and we invite students, and then someone say, "What do you do?" And I talk about my research topic, and then I can just sit back and listen to other people talking about my subject, because everyone has a terrible story to say about this experience in a Jewish school or whatever. So it's a very, very heavy topic today, and I also think it's a very important one. So I hope I can find a way to talk about it in a way that's dispassionate and as objective as possible. Also acknowledge that, I'm a human being with my own biases and my own subjectivity. It's just something here that is very, very much linked to the soul of orthodoxy. What's happening in the firm world is connected to Tzniut. A friend of mine told me that orthodoxy has become the society of Tzniut. I think it's not exaggerated. It's something that is very, very central to the firm world today, and we have to understand.
Yeah. I mean, look at the right-wing media. There are no pictures of women in there. Yeah.
Right. I have a lot to say about that, too.
We also have a lot to say on that. Okay, so this has been so nice. Thank you so much for sharing a generous and valuable hour with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure. And if anyone wants to react, I don't know if you're welcome to give my email address. I'm happy to continue these discussions.
Absolutely. We'll link all your information in the show notes, and feel free to join the WhatsApp group for the week. Feel free to stay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All the best. Thank you. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'm very excited about some of the episodes that are in the works for you in the next upcoming weeks. If you like this podcast, make sure to check the backlog of this podcast. We have some incredible episodes that have been out already for a year or two. We have the From Sex Ed panel. We have all about mikvah, all about nida. We did cover our thoughts about my unorthodox life when the first season came out, so go check that out as well. And we are a part of Jewish Coffee House Network, and there are fantastic podcasts on the network, including Orthodox Conundrum, that's a weekly podcast. There's Intimate Judaism, Chochmat Neshim, and Let My People Eat. So go check them out. If you like the show, make sure you're spreading the word about the show. Tell your friends, your community, share it on your social media. Make sure to follow or subscribe to the show on the app that you listen to make sure you don't miss an episode. And of course, join the WhatsApp group so we can continue the conversations there. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great, fantastic week.